Hello, welcome to this hopefully useful, informative and short session on how to successfully prepare for the CFA exam. Just to introduce myself, my name is Simon Holohan and I'm the head of CFA exam training here at Fitch Learning. If you use our online product, you may well, in fact you will see my videos throughout the different levels. Not only am I the head of CFA, but I do teach all three levels of CFA. So feel free to ask any questions during the session. There should be a little chat box where you can enter any questions, and I will pause periodically to look at my display to my side and answer as many questions as I can. Okay. So the purpose of this session is to introduce Fitch Learning to you. You may not have come across us before. It's a little bit about what we do and how we can help you. But it's mostly to give you some tips. So in a way, it's things which I wish I had known before I started CFA. And we'll talk a bit more about those study tips in a moment's time. But let's first of all just have a quick introduction to us here at Fitch Learning. So as you can see, we have been providing training for quite a while now, so since 2000. Personally, I've been training since 1999, actually. So I've got about 20 years teaching experience regarding CFA. We train over 3,000 candidates a year, so we have a lot of experience, and this training is done throughout the world. So we're used to different candidates with different backgrounds, different cultures, different languages. And yeah, we offer a range of courses. Some people like to use an online course, and there's different versions of an online course. And we have classroom courses. And those classrooms, we have a whole variety of different options, from evening classes to maybe weekend classes. So again, full details you can just find on our website, and there'll be some contact details at the end if you wish to reach out and speak to someone. Right? What I want to do, if I may, because it's going to link into the study tips, is just have a few moments of your time to explain our relatively new online platform, which we call Cognition. Now, Cognition is new, and it's pretty revolutionary, really. I mean, it's a big step up, if I'm honest, in terms of what we did before. And I don't think there's anyone out there that has anything as sophisticated as Cognition. What Cognition has is there's an inbuilt algorithm, which is basically monitoring what you do. And every video you watch, it will make a note of that. Every question you do, it'll make a note of it. Not just did you get the question right or wrong, but even things like how long it took you to answer the question. And everything you're doing is being constantly benchmarked against other delegates. Right? Not necessarily just those delegates for this sitting. If it's a video and a question that has been used in previous years, then all that data is captured as well. So you may be benchmarked against tens of thousands of past candidates. So the algorithm will build up a really accurate profile of your proficiency and your areas of weakness. Right? So it's truly adaptive, and yeah, we could have 10 people sit down and start doing questions on Cognition, and even within about 30 minutes you'll find those 10 people will be looking at different questions, because this algorithm will identify what you can do, what you can't do, and will start to steer you slightly away from what you can do, because there's no point wasting time doing that, and more into areas that you can't do. So it really is a tailor-made adaptive platform. So I will be talking a little bit about Cognition along the way, but it gives you a kind of a little five-minute overview of the product. Okay. There's a little screen grab here, doesn't really mean a great deal, as you can see here, but please, I recommend have a demo. There's links on our website. We can have a tryout of Cognition, and hopefully you'll see how it works. And so I'll be talking a little bit about it along the way. So Cognition is more than just a question bank. So there's videos, there's questions. There's also an online help desk where you can send a question in to me and my team which are spread throughout the world. Okay, so yeah, there's an awful lot more, but again, won't spend too long on it. Just want to just flag up some of the key features, and we'll have a little chat said as we go through. But the main part of this session is these top tips. So this started out about a year ago, and I asked my team to send me some of their top tips. So I basically said, what would you have wanted to have been told before you started CFA? So what we have here is a collaborative output. So we have a variety of trainers around the world. Just in London, which is where I am talking to you from, we probably have collectively well over 100 years worth of CFA training experience. So we have a lot of experience as a company, and what we have here is the benefit of that experience. Now, there's an element of overlap, as you can imagine, with these top tips, but that said, I think if you were to focus on these tips, this will absolutely help you avoid likely traps and problems which you otherwise would have. Right? So we'll have a go through them. Hopefully nothing too tricky or detailed. Hopefully it'll be useful to you. I said before, if you have any queries or questions, use the chat box on your screen, and I will either answer it real time, or if the question is a little bit too specific, I might deal with it offline afterwards. Okay. So let's start with the top tips. Number of hours of study. This is probably the most common question I get asked in class. You know, how many hours do I have to do? Now, the Institute recommends approximately 300 hours per level. Right? And normally at this point, if I'm in a class, and maybe you are doing this right now, there'll be people there thinking, that doesn't mean me. I'm smarter than the average. I've got a good CV. I don't need to do 300 hours. And maybe that's true, but bear in mind the Institute is doing this guidance to the typical candidate, and the typical candidate is someone like you and me, people who work in finance. All right? So they've already factored in the fact that the people who take CFA are above average in terms of academic attainment. Right? So whether you need 300 hours very much depends not on your intelligence or how great your degree is. It's more down to the content of your degree. If you've done, say, an accountancy, finance, maybe econ, you may get away with a bit less. If you've done a non-financial related degree, you'll need 300, maybe a bit more. So it really does depend. Thinking back to when I took CFA, we're talking a long time ago now, the dinosaurs were still walking around the earth. I came into CFA from a background of economics. That's what I used to be. I used to be an economist. So obviously that element of the curriculum I was pretty strong at. I was also very strong on quants, because obviously economics and quants really go hand in hand. And I was reasonably good at fixed income. So I reckon about 30% of the curriculum I would have put a big tick saying, yep, sorted, got that, happy with that. So did I use 300 hours for level 1? No, I didn't need that. I probably did 160, 180, something like that. Okay? But I do tell you for level 2, I did absolutely, well, if I did well more than 300 hours. So for level 2, I probably did 350 to 400 hours. Level 2 is, for most people, the most technically challenging of the 3 levels. So I definitely did more than 300 hours. Level 3, I probably did around about the 250-ish level. So if I average across the 3 levels, it actually gets pretty darn close to that 300 hours. So what I'd recommend, though, for you if you're about to prepare to start for CFA, is I'd go into it on the assumption of 300 hours. If it turns out you don't need 300 hours, hey, it's great to have some spare time left. It's far better to prepare for 300 than to prepare for 200 and then realise that you're short of time near the exam. So if you need 300 hours, the next question is, well, how do I break down that 300 hours? Now, this depends very much on when you start. Obviously, the later you start your preparation, the more hours you've got to squeeze in for each week. I guess for the average typical candidate that spends 5 to 6 months doing CFA, you're looking at 10 to 15 hours, depending on timing, per week. So have a think about that time commitment, and think crucially about when are you going to do those hours. Are you a morning person, an evening person? Are you able to get to work early and perhaps do a couple of hours before the market's open? Or can you leave your desk reasonably early in the evening, maybe at 6 o'clock, and do a couple of hours in the evening? What about weekends? Do you have your weekends free, or do you get called into work at weekends? But have a think and really have a realistic idea about when are you going to do these hours. And for most people, they kind of start off slowish. So maybe your first month, you're perhaps doing nearer 10 to 11 hours. And as you go through the CFA season, you're kind of adding 1 or 2 hours per week. So by the time you're getting to April, May, and early June, you're probably doing 15 to 20, probably nearer 20 hours a week. But I'll talk a little bit about the pace of your study a bit later on. Okay. So plan the 300 hours. Now, we're all busy. I'm sure you are, certainly I am. Therefore, it's important you don't waste any available time. It goes without saying. So how can we help you? Well, I mentioned cognition briefly. Well, the way we do our videoing content is we break it down to small, bite-sized pieces. Basically, this is based on research. We hired an educational consultant to analyze how we train, and they basically recommend this approach. And the reason why is quite obvious when they explain it to us, that the most effective learning any of us have ever done in our life is when we were younger. As a child, we learn quicker than at any other time. And if you think back to how you were taught things as a child, or if you have your own children, how you may teach them certain aspects, what you do is you break it down to small pieces. You don't lecture a kid for 2 hours and expect them to understand what you've said. You talk to them and show them something for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then let them practice to reinforce that skill. That's exactly what we do. So all of our videos are very short, anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes. And following a video, there's usually some very focused questions that just reinforce the content of that video. So if you've only got, say, 10 minutes, 15 minutes spare, you can actually do something very, very meaningful. And all studies show it actually works. This micro or atomization definitely works. Okay. Just had a little question pop up, if I just have a look at it, asking about when is the latest you could start studying. Well, it's impossible to really answer for certain without knowing your background. Obviously, from the CFA exam point of view, there are 2 quite crucial deadlines that are due. Right, so there's a deadline around about the middle of February when the exam fee goes up. So if you book on your exam now, it'll be a lot cheaper than if you leave it to that deadline. And then the next deadline is around about the middle of March. Again, please check the CF Institute website for firm details, but usually around about the middle of March, there's the deadline, the cutoff for exam registration. So if you haven't registered before then, you won't be able to sit the June exam. When are you going to start studying? Well, again, some people start in January, some February, in fact, some even start in March. Right? But do bear in mind what I said, that even if you're starting in March, you're probably going to have to find somewhere of the order of 300 hours. It just means that the number of hours per week simply increases. And you've got to know that when you go into it. But bear in mind, the cognition platform should help you manage the workload in a very efficient way. So I mentioned it briefly as algorithm. The point of the algorithm is to stop you wasting time on areas that you're good at. If you imagine you're good at I don't know, time value of money. Yes, you could do 100 questions on that and get 100 correct, and you'll feel fantastic. You'll think, great bit of revision. But actually, you probably wasted your time. What we'll do, what the algorithm will do, will give you an intelligent sample of, say, 25 questions. And if you get those right, it'll say, okay, we can pretty confidently infer you don't need to do the other 75. So the time you would have spent doing those will be then used for other topics. So hopefully it can do it as an efficient way as possible. Another question here about the exam day experience. That's a great question. If you can hold that question, we'll talk about that because one of the top tips talks about the exam day. So I'll come back to that. Yeah. But all I'd say about starting, the sooner the better. That's all. There's a lot to learn. Even if you're in a finance degree, there's quite a few elements of the CFA curriculum which is different to what you may have studied at university. So the sooner the better for studying, but the ultimate deadline is around about the middle of March. Okay? So allocate time. That leads on to have a plan, which I've kind of been talking about. There's a bit of overlap there. Have a plan about, well, when are you going to do your studying? Now, to help you, Cognition will create an interactive planner, again, so you'll tell the platform when you're going to start. The end date is obviously fixed. That'll be the middle of June for the exam. But then the Cognition platform will work out an appropriate study plan, again, based on all those years of experience we talked about. So we have a pretty good idea and a lot of data to prove it as to how long a typical candidate takes to watch, let's say, the fixed income videos and do the fixed income questions, or do a sufficient sample of them. Right? So we have a pretty good idea. So then we can create a plan to say, okay, well, if you start in January, then we recommend you spend, I don't know, 3 weeks on fixed income. If you start in March, we may say 1 week. Yeah, so the plan will vary. So each of you could have a different plan depending on your start date. Okay. So have a plan is pretty important. Okay. Avoid gaps. Well, again, I kind of mentioned that a few months ago, that the whole point about the Cognition platform is it stops you over-focusing on your strong areas and under-focusing on your weak areas, which is human nature. I'm sure you've done it before in the past. I certainly have. You like to get questions right. So you like to do areas that you know you're good at. And areas you don't like, so for me, deferred tax, I used to hate deferred tax. I used to avoid the questions. I didn't like the feeling of getting a question wrong. I guess you could call it like a loss aversion if you think of it from a behavioural finance point of view. Well, Cognition doesn't let you make that behavioural mistake. So areas that you're good at, it'll soon work out you're strong, and it will say, fine, we've had enough of those questions, let's now start doing some deferred tax ones. So it's really important you cover as much of the curriculum as you can and try and avoid these particular gaps. So, but the platform will do that for you. It's remarkably clever algorithm to pick out these gaps. Okay. Ethics. Ethics is the joint top topic in terms of exam weighting. So 15% of your exam is made up of ethics questions. Right? So really important, just from an exam weighting point of view. It's also really important because if you are a borderline candidate, the CF Institute don't define the definition of borderline, but if you're near the passing score, by the way, nor do they disclose the passing score, so no one knows how much you actually have to score to pass. All the Institute has ever said to us is that no candidate has ever failed who scored 70% or above. Yeah. So we normally recommend you aim for 70%, but who knows, you may pass on 68, 67, 69, we don't know. Right? But anyway, if you're near but just below that passing score, then they'll decide if you pass or fail purely on your ethics score. If you get over 70 on ethics, you've passed. Under 70, you fail. Okay, so ethics is really, really important. But that said, unfortunately, it's really, really dull. It's so dull. I mean, it's really hard to read. After about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you're going to find your your eyelids are feeling quite heavy. So it's a difficult area to motivate. There's no concepts, there's no calculations. It's quite a tricky aspect. How do you cope with ethics? It's up to you, really. There's two main ways. What I did is I preferred the little and often approach. So when I go to work, I commute on a train. I have a train journey, obviously at the front end of the day, at the back end of the day, and that journey takes about 40 minutes. So I should use about half of that time to read one of the standards. The standards is really CFA speak for rules, one of the ethical rules. And so I'd read one standard in the morning and one in the afternoon. And I do that every day I went to work. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, I'd read all of the standards. And then I simply went on a loop. I repeated. So by the time I hit the exam, I had pretty much covered ethics several times. So that worked for me. The other option some of our tutors went for is obviously cramming. Because it's so boring and so non-conceptual, they did it very much like a memory test, and using your short-term memory. So, so put aside a couple of days near the exam, maybe a week away, something like that, or maybe 2 weeks, but I wouldn't go further than that, and just sit down, read the standards, and do questions, and use short-term memory. In terms of ethics, by the way, strongly recommend that you use the official curriculum book for your preparation, because in that book they have some incredibly good little mini case studies, and each case study helps explain whether that particular standard has or has not been violated. It's really, really good resource. All right, so although the rest of the curriculum, I know the CFA curriculum can be a little bit large and unwieldy to get your head around, but for ethics, I think it's important. Okay, I'm just going to pause and have a look through at some other questions that may have come through. Okay, there's questions said about the exam day. I'll have a chat about that later on. There's a question here about classroom sessions. So the classroom sessions, again, for full details about exact timings, there's a contact at the end here. But in the US, we have, say, evening classes and weekend classes. The evening classes, I think, start at 6 p.m. And from memory, they go through to 9 p.m. But so please, I haven't taught in the US for a while, so please reach out to the details at the end. Right? And similarly, Saturday classes are more regular, kind of 9 to 5. Okay. Another question here about revision. Do you include a revision as part of your study plan? To a degree, if I'm honest, the revision part is a bit harder to pin down. Yes, a study plan will say, look, we recommend leaving X number of weeks for revision. And how many weeks you have for revision very much depends on when you start. So if you're starting now, the study plan will probably give you 3 to 4 weeks for revision. If you're starting in March, you might only have 1 week. So it very much depends. So, but what it won't do is break it down and say, okay, well, on Tuesday, the 25th of May, you should be doing fixed income, whatever. So it's not quite granular when it comes to revision. So for most people, I think when you get to, I guess your target typically is to finish your learning, going through all the notes, the videos, the questions, finish that learning, let's say 4 weeks, maybe 5, but before the exam. So the exam is mid-June, so probably aim to finish your learning early May. And if you can leave sort of 4-ish weeks, then that's enough time to go through mock exam, debrief, and try and dot the I's and cross the T's. I don't think I'd aim for much longer than that, because you'll lose the momentum, and also you won't have time to really do the learning. And I wouldn't leave it too short. But obviously what does depend here is how much time you have available. I mean, if you take 2 weeks off work, then okay, you can do a lot in 2 weeks, whereas if you're still working, then you'll need longer just because you need the weekends to do the work. So it very much depends on the revision part. Okay. Anyway, if I haven't answered your question, please do type back, but hopefully that's addressed that issue there. Right? But anyway, so watch out for ethics. It is very, very dull, but very important. The other thing I should have added on ethics is you don't actually have to pass ethics. Yeah, you could go into the exam and get 0 on ethics. Hard to do, but you could. That just means you have to absolutely ace the other 85% of the content. Right? So don't feel you have to pass ethics. But if you are borderline, then it becomes crucial. Okay, so be very careful, and it's incredibly common when I talk to candidates who perhaps haven't passed. This is true of any level, and particularly if they haven't passed but were close to passing. I always ask, the first question is, what did you score in ethics? And they normally say under 70, almost every time. So yeah, please do bear in mind about ethics. Okay, plenty of exam practice. That goes without saying, I think. Lots of exam practice. And make sure the practice is in a style of the exam, you know, the right sort of length, the right wording, that kind of stuff. So we'll obviously provide you with thousands of questions so you can practice. There's a really cool question generator tool, so you can just practice on a certain area. So for me, I wish I had that for deferred tax. I could have just asked it to generate questions on deferred tax, and I'm sure I would have got it in that respect there. So there's plenty of questions there. So there's, I forget the official amount, but thousands, probably 5,000, maybe more, I don't know. But you're not going to run out of questions. But the point about the Cognition platform is you won't do 5,000 questions. Remember, the whole point is to be efficient. So it'll identify where you are strong, and you won't do all those questions. You don't need to do them, and it will divert you to deferred tax or whatever is your weak area. There's also obviously mock exams on the platform, 5 mock exams, and the ultimate, I guess, practice session is to have a go and do a proper proctored 3-hour. Two 3-hour papers. So we do have a proctored mock, which you can book dates for, and there's nothing like the actual experience of sitting down without your notes, so you can't cheat, without your phone to look things up, without getting up and having a coffee break, just sitting there for 3 hours and then another 3 hours. That's a really good learning experience, right? So definitely think about the mocks, which obviously will be later on in your session. Okay. Pace your study. Again, quite important. You can easily burn out and get demotivated doing CFA. So try and peak for the exam day. There's no point peaking before. You don't want to peak after, but you want to build up, get some momentum. It really helps your learning. That's what I said. So start maybe now at sort of 10-ish hours a week, and add an hour as you go through. Maybe every 2 weeks, add an extra hour. So by the time you get to May and June, you are really going full on in your exam preparation. And this will help you build momentum and stop you getting a little bit lacking in motivation. If you do find yourself getting a little bit frustrated, absolutely recommend that you take a break. Have a weekend off, you know, get yourself recharged, you know, have some sleep, yeah, but take a short break, and you'll definitely make up that time by being more efficient afterwards. Right? Before the exam, again, I know it's difficult with work, but maybe think about, can you take a week off before the exam? Can be difficult, I know. Personally, I think this was the deal breaker for me. If you'd asked me on the Monday before the exam, this is true of all 3 levels, you asked me, am I going to pass? I'd have gone, don't know, probably more on the no rather than the yes side. By the Friday, I'd be saying yes. And having those days, consecutive days, where I could do mock after mock after mock after mock, I really started to join the dots up. I know it's not possible for everyone, but if you can, it's probably worth having a conversation now with your line manager before you get near that date. Right? So think about that week off. Obviously, don't overload that last week. You know, there's no point putting out all-nighters and end up on the exam day being so tired that you underperform. So yeah, be realistic. You know, try and aim for 8 to 9 hours of study a day. Probably can't do much more than that in terms of quality learning. Okay. Okay, a quick look at some other questions we have here. There's a question about are there any other tools, books, cheat sheets you would recommend as part of your study? Well, okay, as a Fitch Learning delegate, we do give you a really useful formula sheet. I guess it's a kind of a cheat sheet, but it has all the key formulae and ratios on there. We also have a condensed notebook called the Final Countdown, which again covers mostly the conceptual part of the curriculum. So again, it covers the formulae, the ratios, and a few other bits. So that's quite a thin document. That's quite useful. We provide, as a summary tool, mind maps, which again, if you're a visual learner, you'll find that very useful. In terms of any other books, I'd be wary about using any other book apart from materials prepared by an approved prep provider. The CFA Institute books have got better each year. So, and given that you've paid for them anyway, as part of your exam fee, I think it'd be crazy not to use those. I'm not saying read them from cover to cover. No one does unless you are an instructor at Fitch Learning, in which case we have to, but no candidate reads it. But there are some really good resources in there. So if you can, I would use the CFA books. Ethics, I think, definitely use for ethics. As for the rest of the readings, I think the end of reading questions are worth having a look at. And probably the best resource, which is kind of the most underused, I think, from candidates, is the little case studies. We call them blue boxes. If you look in the official curriculum, little case studies, blue boxes, which are often a bit more involved as a question or as a scenario than the exam will be, but they really help to explain the content. So I'm a massive fan of the blue boxes, right? Particularly if you are resitting, right? So if you are resitting and you haven't looked at the blue boxes, you in particular will really benefit because you won't need to go through the basics, the foundations again, because that will kind of come back pretty quickly. What the blue box examples do is they just take you a little bit beyond the level you have to get to for the exam. But you should be able to understand that, and I absolutely guarantee that you'll benefit by doing the blue boxes. Most people doing CFA for the first time often run out of time doing the blue boxes. I get that, in which case you should prioritise the end of reading questions and obviously the question bank we have. But if you're resitting, which there's a question here about resitting, those blue boxes are gold dust. All right? So because there's no point looking at maybe the questions at the back, you probably have seen those, you may even remember the answers, and they don't change that often from the CFA curriculum. But the blue boxes you may not have had a look at. So that would be my advice, certainly if you're looking to resit. Okay. Does cognition help you keep you on track? Probably the best way it does this is what we call email a day, okay, which in the settings you can set to either be random or have it follow your cognition process. And so I prefer the latter. So if I'm working through fixed income, it'll know I'm there from monitoring my activity, and then every day I'll have in my inbox a question on fixed income. Now that question is from the question bank, all right? So I would have seen it anyway, but having it in my email at the start of the day, and I say the start, it certainly in London time it comes in at usually about 10 to 4 in the morning. So it's not good if you leave your phone by the side of your bed, but it comes in really early for London time, and that's just a reminder, that's a prompt. So yeah, when I do check my phone first thing in the morning, one of the first emails I see is this question. And that just is a great way of just saying, listen, you're doing CFA. And it reminds you to keep going. Right? In terms of keeping you on track, that interactive planner will adjust. All right? So it will change as you progress or don't progress. And there's also a fantastic summary of your progress. So we have these little kind of mini quizzes. We call them knowledge checks. Right? And there's a little kind of a graphic that simply shows you, very simply, have you completed all the knowledge checks. It shows you which ones you've completed, which ones you haven't. It's color-coded. It's very simple to use. And that's a great way of looking at your progress. But I must say, there's an element of responsibility for the candidate. There's only so much cognition can do to keep you on track. Okay. Question here about someone based in Iceland. Oh, fantastic country. I had a great holiday in Iceland a few years back. Stayed at my friend's farm up at the north. Lovely country. Okay, so a question about condensed versions of the course. Yes, we do. We do this for all 3 levels. We have what we call the intensive course, which apart from Dubai, but you're saying Iceland, these are 5-day programs. So we run them in London and also in North America. And they do assume that you've done some studying beforehand. Right? And in those 5 days, the instructor will go through the curriculum, obviously fast, won't go through the whole curriculum, but will go through the bits that we know from our experience get tested with a high degree of frequency. Right? So the curriculum you can kind of break down into core and non-core. And I've chatted with the examiner about this aspect. Right? The core part is usually about 60%. Right? And we kind of know from analysing the exam and looking at the CFA curriculum, you get a feel as to which part of the curriculum doesn't change year on year. That tends to be the core part. Right? Now, you can't pass the exam by just acing the core part. So you have to look at some other part as well. But the core part is crucial. You certainly can't pass the exam without acing the core part. So the intensive course will very much focus on the core part. And we will go through quite quickly and cover that core part, that 60%. Okay, we'll cover more than that, but the focus is on the core part. But that'll be usually the option, and we get a lot of candidates who fly in from various destinations and come in for that intensive program. So I think that would be the perfect choice. The other option we have is if you want to do all of the learning yourself, then we do offer just a review class. That tends to be 2 days, where again it's question and debrief. So the instructor will again assume that you've done some work here, and we'll pick out a selection of questions, maybe half a dozen questions on, compounding, and ask you to do those under the time constraints, and there'll be a debrief. As the debrief is where obviously we can dot the I's and cross the T's. So I think either the intensive and or the 2-day revision sounds perfect for you. Question from someone from the UK, is there still time to sign up for the classroom courses? Yes, we have, the UK is our biggest centre. We have lots of different classes, and there are still some classes which have yet to start. I don't know all the details off the top of my head, but there is. So if you want an evening class, there's an evening class that hasn't started yet. There's a Saturday class that hasn't started yet. As for the week classes, the weekday and the Friday, not 100%, but definitely just contact the details at the back and you'll get confirmation. Right? And one last question before I move on here is about how does the help desk work? Okay, so it's a global help desk. So we have trainers all over the world. You can log a query, and we aim to get back to you within 24 hours. Now, I'll be honest, as with any business, we have periods of peak activity. We have periods where people are ill and all sorts of issues. So it's not I can't promise it, but that's certainly our intent. If there's like a public holiday, a bank holiday as we call them here in the UK, then most of you are off work. And of course, when you're off work, you're studying. So, and you'll send help desk queries. So the day following a public holiday, we'll have significantly more queries than a normal day. So again, things like that may cause a slight delay in the timing. But generally speaking, we get back to you pretty quickly. Again, it depends on the nature of your query. As you go through CFA, perhaps at level 3, the queries get a lot more detail to unpick. And so sometimes in the past, I've emailed someone and said, look, your query is really quite tricky to be able to articulate the answer. I'll get back to you in, say, 2 days' time. Level 1, it's quite unusual that we don't get back to you within 24 hours. So that's certainly our aim, and I'd say probably 95% of queries are replied, certainly at level 1, in 24 hours. Right? If you come on a class, you may prefer simply to email directly your tutor. So again, I get a mixture of delegates emailing me directly, with queries and some using the help desk. Help desk is arguably more efficient because it's not just me answering the help desk, it's my entire global team answering. But again, you have a bit of a choice there between those two types of help. Okay, the calculator. Okay, I had a question about the calculator, so let's talk about the calculator. You're only allowed 2 calculators. I'd say 2 models, I should say. The Texas Instruments BA2+, and the Hewlett-Packard 12C. Okay. You can't have any other calculator. So there's no point saying, what about my favourite Casio I used at school? Forget it. You know, only these 2. They're reasonably similar. The HP is a lot more money than the Hewlett-Packard, and it uses a different operating system. If you haven't used the HP before, don't bother going there. All right? It's too difficult to start. All right? If you're a dinosaur like me, and everyone in the 90s on the street was using the HP. So people who have been in banking in the 90s will know the HP. Anyone who's come through CFA through the noughties and more recently probably have never seen the HP. So I would use the Texas. We recommend the Texas Instruments calculator. It's cheaper and more like a normal calculator. It's like having also a little mini Excel in your pocket. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, it can do calculations like IRR. IRR is a really computationally heavy calculation, but it can do that far quicker than the HP, far quicker. So it's a really powerful calculator. Not the best display, if I'm honest. So again, part of your challenge is to get used to the calculator and used to the limitations as well as the strengths. Now, of course, we can help you with that. We have extensive videos online showing every single function that you'll need of this calculator. We have a list of some of the main ones here. Again, if you don't know these, then that's your challenge to have a look at it. I think my favourite as a candidate used to be the I-convert one, where you can easily switch between a compound interest rate and a simple interest rate. But anyway, you need to make sure you know all of those. And so by come the exam, this should become second nature. You really don't want to be wasting time looking at it thinking, which button do I press? Yeah, you can't afford that time. All right, so have the calculator, get it, and use it. Yeah, have it on your desk at work. Yeah, and try and use it as much as possible. Every single calculation question we have on cognition will show the calculator keys, but we'll show the Texas Instruments. We no longer support HP because so few people use the HP, and those that do use the HP because they know how to use it. But if you haven't used it before, please don't pick it up. It's really just for dinosaurs like me on the whole. Okay. But there's our calculator issue there. Peer support. This actually was my recommendation. When we pulled everyone's ideas, this was mine. It's really important to have support of the people around you for 2 reasons. One is to create like a study group, which is very, very useful. I study with my friend Helen. She's a Goldman's employee. And it was really good to bounce ideas off each other. I'd often explain something to her, and hearing myself explain it actually made me understand it, and vice versa. And also just hearing that someone else found something difficult. You know, I'd call her up and say, Helen, what's going on here? And she'll say, I don't know either. And having confirmation that it's not just you, that you're not the one being stupid and being an idiot, is actually quite relaxing. It makes you feel normal and stops you getting too stressed. So I think having like a study group is really important. Also, talk to your peer group at work. That's also important. Because we all know what it's like, if you sneak away from your desk at 5:30, 6 o'clock, people start muttering and looking at you and thinking you've gone part-time. It's not a great work environment. If you are open with your colleagues at work and say, listen guys, I'm doing CFA. I've got to find 300 hours of study. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm going to be leaving here at 5:30, not to go to the pub and have a beer, but to go and do 3 hours of study. I think the more you let people know that, and your line manager, maybe the line manager can alter your workload, maybe, I don't know. But I definitely bring that wider group, and that makes it a lot easier to sort out your learning. Now, if you can't form your own study group, you don't know anyone, so if you maybe in the middle of Iceland and there's no one else you know doing CFA, okay, then we can be your study group as instructors. So again, you can use the help desk, ask questions, which is what it's designed for. You know, why is this happening, or why isn't A the answer? And we can definitely bounce ideas off you to help explain that. But I said I definitely found the benefit of having my own study group, and I would recommend doing that as much as possible. Cramming. I mean, if you Google CFA exam preparation, you'll find stories of people who are saying, oh, it's easy, level 1's easy, I did it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Okay, there may be the odd person who has done that, but I don't really believe it. I don't think you can cram. There's simply too much content to learn. Okay, elements you can cram, like ethics possibly, but I don't think you can cram all of it. So I wouldn't even try that. So that really goes back to my first point, my first 2 points. Be honest with yourself, accept it's going to be 250, 300 hours, and have a plan. You know, don't try and think just because you went to a great university, you work for a great bank, you may have a master's from a great business school. Doesn't really mean a lot, actually. A lot of the content for CFA is sufficiently different that you still have to learn it, memorize it. So I don't even try and have a cram approach. I simply don't think it will work, right? Which I think is why the CFA Institute wisely put the last date for registration still several months before the exam. So middle of March is the end. They don't want people booking the exam in June, early June, for the exam middle of June. I mean, they don't want that. So I think they understand the fact that this should not be a cramming approach, okay? Okay, the pressure of the exam day. We had a question here earlier on, if I scroll back, about the exam day. Where is it here? I'm trying to find it. Okay, I've lost the question here, but it's a question about the exam day and the proctors of the exam day. Well, the CFA exam is obviously a global exam. It's a very famous exam. It's really the benchmark in financial services. So obviously they take security very carefully. So the proctors will be extremely vigilant. Right? And I urge you, when you get nearer to the exam, to read the CFA Institute's exam policy, right, and follow it to the letter. Every year, hundreds of candidates have their result ripped up because they violated one of these policy rules. And the curriculum proctors are, to them, it's black and white. There's no grey. So if they say stop writing and you have just finished off one answer, a few seconds after they've said stop, there's no point saying, but it was only 3 seconds. They'll say, tough. You are writing after the exam time. Or the most common one that catches people out is cell phones, mobile phones. The policy is very clear. You're not allowed to have a cell phone on your person in the exam centre. Right? And yet every year, scores of people have their result ripped up, and they always say the same thing. They say, but it's switched off. And the proctor says, I don't care. The rule is you're not allowed to have it on your person. So please, make sure you do that. I've never had an exam, I must say, in all my years, that was as ruthlessly administered as a CFA. So it's really important you read that policy and follow it to the letter. Okay, what about the exam? Well, I guess the main top tip I want to highlight here is the physical demand of the exam, which may sound a bit weird. You're sitting down and doing multiple choice, but trust me, it's physically demanding. If you do an exam in a big testing centre, then it's a bit like an airport. You have to allow time to get through their version of security. So every candidate has to have their passport checked, exam ticket checked, their calculator checked or wiped. They may check what's in your your pockets and stuff. So every person goes through a kind of security type process. So if you're in a big centre where there may be a few thousand people, that's going to take time. So although the exam starts at 9 o'clock, you probably want to start queuing to get in past the security by, say, 8 o'clock, 7:45, something like that. If you leave it too late, they will simply shut the door and lock you out of the exam. They'll let you back in once they've started the exam, but you'd have lost probably 20 or 30 minutes of your time. So realistically, you are seated from about 8 o'clock in the morning. The exam finishes in the morning at 12 o'clock. It takes the proctors probably 10 or 15 minutes to collect all the scripts and dismiss people. So you're out by about 12:15. The afternoon exam starts at 2, but again, you've got to start queuing from about 1. So you're only going to have about a 45 minute break. And then the afternoon exam obviously starts from 2 through to 5. So you're going to be in that exam hall for approximately 8 hours with no access to food, right, and limited access to water. You're not allowed to have a water bottle at your desk. There are water fountains located in the test centres, but that involves you being escorted to a fountain, losing time, and certainly the ones that I had the most stupid cups. I mean, this is kind of a decent cup, it's fine, but the ones we had in my centre were these tiny little, almost thimble size, tiny cups. And you're doing like 100 little cups for a decent mouthful. The chances are, therefore, you will not do that. And you won't have much time at lunchtime to rehydrate. So in the afternoon, you're going to be dehydrated and you're going to underperform. So know that, get used to that. You can actually train your body to cope. If any of you have experienced Ramadan, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You get used to the fact that you hydrate at nighttime, the evening before. You can do that. And that way, during the day, you don't worry too much about not drinking. But this is all part of your preparation. But please don't underestimate the physical demands of this exam. All right? So get used to it. The proctored exam, great opportunity to try that. And try and train your body as much as you can to get used to these demands. As for the rest of the part of the exam, I guess the rest hopefully is there to reassure you. There's no negative marking, so guess every question. And don't worry about questions that you don't know. That's human nature. You don't have to get 100%, remember? You only have to get above the minimum passing score, which is around 70%. Okay? Administration issues to flag up before you get near the end is make sure your passport is valid on the exam date, and make sure the name in your passport matches the name when you registered for the exam. All right. A lot of people when they work, they have shortened names, or you might adopt a name which is easier to pronounce than your real name. And quite often you get so used to this kind of second name that it becomes human nature when you type in your name onto an application, use your kind of second or adopted name. It has to be the same as in your passport. Doesn't mean you don't have to have all the middle names, but your first name and your chosen name, your surname, they have to match. So just make sure that's the case. But once you've done that, nearer the time, you can print off your exam ticket, keep it with your passport, and keep it safe. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about for the exam day is tactics. How do you go about the paper? Well, there's two options. One is start at question 1 and finish at question 120, and do that for the 2 exams, which is fine, you can do it. Personally, I used to like to focus on my strong areas, because my strong areas, A, gave me confidence, and B, I knew I could do them quicker than the time allocation that was awarded to me. So you get 1.5 minutes per question. My strong areas, I knew from practice I could do them easily within that time, and that allowed me to save this spare time to focus on my trickier areas. The topics, by the way, are grouped together. So all of the ethics questions are in one part, all the fixed income in one part, etc. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I went straight to the econ section, bashed through that, aced that. Then the quant section, bashed through that. Then actually ethics, I used to always love ethics, bashed through that. So I'd go through those topics, I'd go through them fast but with confidence, and that relaxed me a bit, and it saved me time, which I then used particularly for financial reporting, which I found took me significantly more than 1.5 minutes per question. If you do it in the order, you'll find FRA is quite near the exam. And I think if you do it in order, you get to the FRA questions and you'll panic because you'll be running out of time. You won't be doing each question in 1.5 minutes. And that panic will lead to mistakes. Because at that time, you won't know that the questions following are quicker to do. So I would do the strong areas first, and that way you know how much time you have available for the, your weak areas. Okay. A few other questions before we start to conclude here. Okay, you mentioned about the calculators. The question is, I have a TI-89. No, it has to be a Texas Instruments BA2 Plus calculator, or the HP12C. There's a couple of versions of the Texas ones. There's a Texas Instruments BA2 Plus Professional, and then I think the student version. They're both fine, but they're still the BA2 Plus. Okay, another question here about level 2 versus level 1. This is quite a difficult one to answer quickly. All I'd say is the difference is significant in terms of difficulty. I said, you know, level 1, I probably did about 170, 180 hours of study. Level 2 probably did near 400. Level 2 is a much narrower exam. It's almost the opposite of level 1. Level 1 is very broad. You cover pretty much everything, but only to a very small amount of detail. So very broad, not very deep. Level 2 is quite narrow, but really deep. You know, the level of detail you go through, for example, in accounting, it is not far short as if you're training to be a public accountant. You know, you'll be surprised, things like pension accounting. You know, you ask most accountants to explain a pension liability. Watch how fast they backtrack and make excuses. Well, I'm afraid you won't be able to make excuses. So it's very, very technical. It's very narrow, but it's a big, big step up. So I just want to warn you for that there. And also the exam is different. The exam is based around case studies. Each case study has 6 multiple choice questions. But the key is to understand and often to analyze the case study. So it's a very, very different exam. It is personally the hardest of the 3 levels. So level 1 is kind of like an intro jargon busting, you know, knowing a little bit about everything. Level 2, they really drill down into the technical difficulty, particularly focus on pricing and valuing of equity, bonds, derivatives, and understanding accounts. Level 3, well, that's actually the most interesting of the 3 levels. That's where you bring it all together and really try and apply it in the context of a particular kind of client. It could be an institutional client, it could be a private client, but level 3 is not technical, but it's really interesting. I love it, level 3. I teach it probably more than the other 2 levels now, but they are quite different. But level 2 is a big step up. So if you are thinking of doing level 2, then everything I've said still applies, but just probably do more hours. And the thing with level 2, I guess the other difference is with level 1, you can get a question right without actually understanding the topic. Yeah? At level 2, you probably find that will not work. So you have to really keep asking yourself, do I actually understand what's going on here? Not, can I identify the right answer? Because although that will get you through level 1, level 2 it won't. So much more focus on understanding for level 2. But say if you have any other questions, particular about levels 2 or 3, it might be best to just reach out to the contacts at the end of the slide pack, and they can forward them on to me, and I will deal with them separately. Right. Question, are the topics covered in the 2 sessions different, or do all topics have a section in both? Okay, I assume you're talking about the exam here. That's again a good question. For level 1, the morning and afternoon paper are kind of copycats. So in the morning paper, you'll have every section covered. So ethics, quants, econ, FRA, corporate finance, etc. And then exactly the same in the afternoon paper. So they will be two identical looking papers. When you get to levels 2 and 3, that will not be the case. The morning and afternoon paper will not necessarily be equally balanced. So at level 2 and 3, you may find all of the ethics questions are in the afternoon and none in the morning. But for level 1, it's an equally balanced exam. So say the morning paper, afternoon paper will look exactly the same. Okay. Here, on this slide here, a quick review or reminder of some of our classroom options we've been talking about. So evening, weekend, daytime, etc., intensive classes. But say the, the timings do vary slightly from different regions, so please contact the details coming up for more information. We mentioned a bit about the Cognition platform. So if you come on a classroom program, then obviously the online is included. But again, there's lots of different options. I don't want to go through all of those. It's all clearly on the website. But pretty much any element of what we've been talking about, you can probably reach out to us and just have the element. If you just want the mocks, for example, or just the review exercises and the question generator, we can do that. Yeah, you know, please do reach out and talk to these various people. And if they can't answer your question, they will direct it to me. I'm sure they can answer all your queries. If there are any other questions, then say either email to these people and they can forward on to myself. Or if you want to email me directly, you can probably tell my email from how these are set up. So it's simply our name with a dot in between. So it'd be simon.holohan and then simply at fitchlearning.com. Anyway, so good luck in your preparation. I hope this has been useful, and maybe I will see you at some point in your journey. Anyway, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.